What up, City of Champions? Today, I'm coming to you from the Pudong side of the Huangpu River in Shanghai, China. I'm here with my team shooting segments for an upcoming documentary on hockey in China. We've been here for about 30 hours now, but it feels more like a week. Jet lag is kicking my ass. On the bright side, I can now say I've eaten chicken foot, and that I know I do not enjoy it, like at all. So I can check that one off the list for good. You can catch all the travel adventures on the documentary Instagram account at Hockey in China. My guest this week is a man who has done more for disabled athletics than anyone else on the planet. Dr. Bob Steadward founded the Steadward Centre for Personal and Physical Achievement in 1978 at the U of A, and over the last 40 years has helped change the lives of tens of thousands of those living with physical impairments. He's also the founding president of the International Paralympic Committee. I'm going to list a few of his awards and designations here to give you some idea of the scope of his work. Dr. Steadward is an officer of the Order of Canada, a member of the International Olympic Order and the International Paralympic Order, and an honorary life member of the Canadian Olympic Association. He was named a U of A Alumni of Distinction and earned the U of A Rutherford Award for Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching, the King Clancy Award for Outstanding Contributions to Canadians with Disabilities, and the Lowest Hole Community Development Award. He is a member of the University, Edmonton, Alberta, and Canada Sports Hall of Fame. That was 3 of them in a row, if you didn't catch that. And the Terry Fox Hall of Fame. In 2004, Bob was named one of top Edmontonians of the century. And most recently, and this is pretty remarkable, he was named one of 125 of Alberta's greatest citizens over the past 2 centuries. What have you done with your life lately, people? Affectionately known as Dr. Bob, the man has made a tremendous positive impact on so many lives, and it's quickly evident in our conversation why he is held in such regard not only as a doctor, but as a human being. Podcasters, I give you Dr. Bob Steadward. Dr. Bob Steadward, thank you for joining me today.
You're very welcome.
How's life treating you?
Well, it couldn't be better, when you're still looking down at the daisies, not up at them. So I guess that's always a plus. No, it's excellent.
I like that. That's a good way of looking at things. Now, in my extensive research of you, which took a long time because you've done an incredible number of things in your life and had a very celebrated career in athletics, specifically disabled athletes. I want to take everyone back to where it all started for you, and I don't mean in that career, I mean in life. So you grew up in Saskatchewan.
Yes, I did. I grew up in a very small farming community in southern Saskatchewan, and I guess like all small town boys in Saskatchewan, you're involved in every conceivable sport that you could imagine. So I played a lot of hockey, baseball, football, track, everything. And then, and it was interesting, people always say, was there anything special that got you involved eventually in your life working with people with disability? And there really wasn't, but the only thing I can think of was when I was young growing up, my grandmother had a stroke, and so she lived with us. So she was paralyzed on her one side and she didn't have speech, but I never considered her disabled at all. She was just grandma, right? So
grandma's got a thing.
Yeah, exactly. So there was nothing unique or special about that at all. And then I got to the point through when I was growing up that I wanted to bust out. I needed to do something more different. So I left home when I was about 15 years old. Moved into Regina, went to
big city for you at the time. I'm sure.
Big city for me at the time, yeah. And I lived in a boarding school called Luther College, which really provided me with great opportunities in sport because I played both football and basketball and track and baseball with the school. We won many.
You must have been a popular kid in school.
Yeah, well, of course, they had Letterman jackets.
Yeah, and you had every single one.
So you had all the buttons and stripes that you can, and then I also played hockey too at quite a high level. I guess that I would consider it the college or university level in Regina, and then from there I moved up to Edmonton back in 1964, summer of 64.
So I want to ask you something, like the career that spanned over 50 years and taken you around the world. What did you think you were going to be when you were growing up in Saskatchewan? What did you picture the future had in store for you?
Well, I guess when I left home at 15, I didn't know what was going to be in store for me, because my mind really wasn't thinking of a career, a profession. It was just thinking of being the best that I could in sport, because I wasn't big, so I had to give it 110% effort and work harder than everyone else in order to succeed. And I had very good success, particularly in track and field, because I ran nationally for Canada and as a sprinter and that. So I did see some success, but never ever thought of a career. And then as I was finishing off high school and coming to the university, I thought, God, what am I going to take at university? But I had a friend who was a couple years older than me growing up in Saskatchewan, and he came to U of A just before me, and he was in dentistry. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll be a dentist. It's sort of like, well, he's doing it, and he was sort of my idol growing up. And he was likely the most iconic dentist that ever came through the U of A. Worldwide authority on particularly people when they bash their faces in accidents. He rebuilt faces. So he's very talented. But, so I started down that line, and I sort of gave up on the sports scene too much. And I said I wasn't very happy. So I got out of university for about a year and a half. And started thinking more about a career. So I said, well, I'm going to go back into kines, because there's got to be something in there for me. So I really took the interest in kinesiology. I wasn't very successful before, but I went from the outhouse to the penthouse. I went from not doing very well at school, at university, to being the top of the class.
So I just want to touch on a really interesting point, because we're so often petrified by the fear of failure. Going into dentistry after your model, your buddy here, did you have any self-doubt, or were you just like, well, I'll try it? Or were you worried about failing? And then also, how did you recover from not doing so well in it? How did you get yourself back to
I was totally in fear of failing, and it wasn't that.
But you did it anyway.
But I did it anyway, and it wasn't that I was going to let myself down and my family. I was worried more about my friend who had such high expectations for me. But I developed that philosophy that you're not a failure if you fall down. You are only if you stay down.
Exactly.
So I had to pick myself back up and look on the side of things that I felt were important to me, that I could be successful at. And so when I went into kines, I got involved in a couple of classes in anatomy and sport medicine, and flourished there. And
what did you do in your time off?
I actually, because I was pretty handy with my hands, I worked as a carpenter. So I went back home, took on a couple of projects back home, and I did that until I got back into university. And
was there something about that profession where you knew, you're like, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life?
Yeah. I mean, freezing my butt off at minus 40, pounding nails on the rooftop, it wasn't my cup of tea.
But you got that perspective to know, all right, if I don't go back to school, I'm going to end up doing this, so I better go back to school.
And I also worked for Julian's Masonry in Edmonton. And with bricklayers, hauling mud and doing labor, and then getting the opportunity to lay the odd brick and block and that with some of the guys who were all immigrants who came over from Germany or Italy or wherever, and they taught me a lot about life. I helped them with their English, they helped me with life, and so those kinds of experiences you put in the bank,
of course,
and you just begin to say, there's going to be a time when I'm going to have to use those kinds of opportunities and experiences that you've had and to move forward.
Mm-hmm. So I'm seeing a little bit of a common theme here with you. You've got the incident with your grandma when you're younger, though it might not have consciously affected you, subconsciously, potentially. Then you've got this group of immigrant workers that are your close buddies.
Yeah.
You seem to kind of have a penchant, and then you start working with the physically disabled. You seem to kind of have a penchant for the underdog.
I do. I did, and I still do. I felt that, in high school, I excelled academically and more so athletically. Mm-hmm. I mean, my first year in high school, grade 9 or grade 10, I was starting in football with the football team, and I wasn't that big, but I was fearless and I was aggressive. And same with hockey, same with baseball, etc. So it did me well, and I got a lot of opportunities to travel and perform and do that. Mm-hmm. When I came up to Edmonton and first met a few people with a disability, and they came and asked me if I would help them start a wheelchair basketball club and start an organization, I looked at them and they weren't getting any breaks. Mm-hmm. And so when I said that I would help them wherever I could, which was in 1967, I really felt that when we started organizing the different sport groups, we couldn't find a high school or a junior high that was accessible for people using a wheelchair. Mm-hmm. So I said, this is not fair. Yeah. So that sort of just pulled me in further and further and further. The rabbit hole, yeah. Because 10 years after I started with them, that's when I created the Steadward Centre at the university, mm-hmm. so that they had an accessible place to come and work out, and also that they were able to develop skills that would help them to become more independent. Right. So it would open up job opportunities for employment, for education, for living, mm-hmm. etc. So can you talk to us about, not enough coffee yet, about all the things that go on at the Steadward Centre when you started it and today where it is now? Yeah. Well, this is, we're going to be celebrating our 40th anniversary mm-hmm. this year in 2018. And when I first started, I said, I've got to find a place where people with disability can come onto the university and have and work with this equipment that I've been able to rummage around. Mm-hmm. And so at the time, the university was making a decision to centralize their libraries. So all the little faculty and department libraries were closing down. Right. So I saw a space where all the shelves and books were. Well, the day that they moved out, I moved in. I didn't ask. Mm-hmm. I just moved in because I thought it was easier to ask for forgiveness and permission. Yeah. So I took that over. Love it. By the way. Had a session with the dean, and I said, this is what I'm going to do, Dean. This is my goals and my aspirations, my dream for these people, mm-hmm. and I'll make it happen, and I'll make the faculty and the university proud, which they have been since then. So that started off, actually as a place for athletes with a disability to work out. Right. Then I said, well, these athletes have got to come from somewhere. Mm-hmm. So then I expanded the program to all athletes who are just interested in their general health and fitness and lifestyle and independence. So that started, and then a few years went further down the line, and I said, well, we've got to make sure that we provide opportunities for young children with disability, right? Because I see them in all of these schools in and around the Edmonton area and nationally and internationally where they're not getting an opportunity. Phys ed, they go to the library, they sit in the side and and take notes or whatever. So we started a program for young children, which started off with 4 or 5 families, mm-hmm. and now we've got over 800 disabled children participating in the program. Yeah. So the whole center has just grown in leaps and bounds, and so we've gone from that little, 600 or 700 square foot center that we made work for many years to a 17,000 square foot facility now that serves children and adults with disabilities, I say, from the womb to the tomb. We have them all.
Yeah.
And all of their programs are individually developed to meet their interests, their needs, their capabilities. And as a result now, the Steadward Centre has become really the only unique center in the world that, and we provide clinics and workshops all over the world to help other countries develop similar kinds of programs and facilities, which have happened in China and Korea and Japan and places like that because of my international contacts. Because I suppose, having traveled to nearly 150 countries in the world with my work with the International Olympic Committee and the International Paralympic Committee as the founding president, it gives you a lot of opportunities to make a difference and to help other countries change and get the same kinds of changes and opportunities that we've experienced here in Edmonton and Canada.
What percentage of the work you do there with the whether they're athletes or just not able-bodied people, what percentage is physical and what percent is mental training?
Well, one of the when you're working with athletes, and certainly over the years, I worked with many, many more people than just athletes with a disability. As you know, I worked in the early days of the Steadward Centre back in 78, 79 when we first opened with the Edmonton Oilers, concerned about their off-ice training programs. I worked with Jamie Slay and David Pelche more on what was between their ears and not their skates on the ice.
Did you listen to my Jamie Slay episode yet?
No.
I podcasted with her a couple months ago.
Oh, did you?
One of my favorite episodes. She was great. But she talks about that specifically, about the mental aspect of her training and how she had to have the verbal cue. Stop. She would physically say stop.
Yeah.
And she started psyching herself out.
Yeah. Well, I worked all of that with her. I taught them all about her and David about relaxation, focusing, concentration, rehearsal, visualization, and all that. So we went over that for time and time again. And and so I worked with a lot of athletes dealing with that, because as you look at any athlete preparing for competition, I mean, if it's for the Olympics, it's usually a 4-year cycle because they're every 4 years. So at the first year, an athlete's going to spend about 80% of the time in physical, developing the skills and the fitness, etc., and 10 to 20% on the mental. And that gradually works and changes over those 4 years. So the last year, they're spending about 70 to 80% on maintaining strong mental toughness, and only 20 to 30% on maintaining their skill levels. Right. So it really does change over the years, and certainly Jamie and David were perfect in that regards, because they were very, very strong back in 99, 2000 when they came together physically, but they did nothing as far as preparing mentally. So when they won the Worlds in 2001, now all of a sudden you're the best of the best,
right,
but you haven't won the gold,
right,
and they're going to come to knock you off. So we spent a lot of time that year on those kinds of skills as well. And I think one of the reasons why it worked out with them is I wasn't their sport counselor. I was their life coach,
right?
Because I took care of everything. I took care of their community relations, media relations. I took care of their bank accounts. I set up their companies, the whole shebang. I helped the whole person,
right?
And that made a big difference, because they were certainly getting taken advantage of by a few other people who were in their lives that damn near destroyed them.
Right. Well, athletics is so competitive now that you need the support team. You need all the people behind the scenes taking care of all that stuff.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
So they can focus on the one thing that's going to make them the best that they can be.
And that's what I always encourage, not just Jamie and David, but I basically took Brett Kissel from this the snot-nosed, little cocky high school kid, to where he is today, in part because I had him for those first 7 or 8 years. And I really had to teach him some skills in life and survival. Because at the time he was going down the wrong path.
Right.
And it's interesting to listen to him even today when he's talking with the crowd, when he's talking with the media. He uses the same words that I instilled in him 12 years ago.
It's incredible. Well, you did a fantastic job with him. I only met him in the last couple of months, and he just feels like the most genuine, down-to-earth person you'd ever speak with.
Yeah.
And one of those people that makes you really feel like you're the only person that matters when he's talking to you. He
absolutely.
blocks everything
He does. And he's so good that way, Shane. He's as I've always told him, I said, Brett, you just make sure that hat always fits your head. And you remember where you've come from and how you got to here. There were a lot of people helping you along the way. And you're going to meet as many people going up the ladder as you do down the ladder. And so, appreciate what everyone does for you to help your career become a success that it is. And I mean, I knew nothing about the music industry, and him and his mom came to me and said, well, would you manage Brett? I said, well, what do I said, well, gosh, you've managed NHL hockey players and Slade Pelche and these people and these people. What's wrong with managing him? Well, I know nothing about music.
Right.
But I said, look, give me a couple of weeks
right.
to think about it. So I thought that would get them off my back. 2 weeks to the minute, at 8 a.m., I was at a rodeo down in Strathmore. Phone rang. Have you made up your mind, Doc? I said, okay, I'll help you. Right. But I said, look, I'm not in it for any ego. I don't need this job. I'm going to help you as much as I can about life and facilitate your music career. But there's going to come a point in time when you are at a level where I cannot help you. And it did come to that, and Brett and I went on a couple of road trips down to Nashville so we could meet more people in the industry and try to find someone in the industry who could manage him. Because I've always told every athlete, whether it was Jennifer Heil or any of these people, I said, look, you've got to surround yourself with a team you can impeccably trust.
Right.
So you do what you do and let them do what they do.
Yeah.
And I've always pushed that with the athletes that I've worked with, whether they're athletes with a disability or non-disability. Doesn't matter.
Right. Well, I mean, it seems like you built really strong foundations for a lot of these people. And when you're talking about the foundation, it's the same no matter what you're in, right?
And you've hit on it, Shane. The principles are the same. The building blocks are the same. It's just a matter of using those building blocks and that foundation and that individual. And then you try to work those two together to help them along the road. I mean, they're all individuals and they all have their uniqueness. I mean, Jamie and David were as different as night and day. But
synergistic at the same time, right? Their differences made them better together.
Well, and it was really interesting because, of course, as you know, David is very much a perfectionist. Jamie is very skilled, but she's not the kind of perfectionist that David was.
Right. And
as a result, until they got on the ice together for the very first time, grabbed onto hands, it was like magic.
Right.
Because they just had the right thing.
Yeah.
But I also told them I know that it's not going to work if they get married too.
Listen to Dr. Bob.
I know, but they had such different lives.
Yeah.
I mean, David was.
It's just funny because they're in the same sport.
Same sport, but he was brought up in Quebec in the Gaspé Peninsula, very strong, traditional French Canadian family. Jamie was from Redneck, Alberta, from up at Athabasca, and it was really funny. The funny story about Jamie Saleh is that Randy Gregg and I had our sport medicine clinic together, and so I was down at the Royal Glenora and had met Jamie for the first time. Well, she had some aches and pains, and she wanted to talk to me about her career. So this was in 92, 92, I think, or 93, leading up to Lilyhammer. So she came over to the clinic, and we started talking, and I said, well, remember, Jamie, you said you're a minor, so I have to share things with your parents.
Right.
Well, my father's in Red Deer, my mother's in Edmonton, they're not together, so that's fine. So her mother called me, and and I was talking to her, and then within a minute she said, Bob, don't you remember me? I said, oh. I started to go back.
The mental Rolodex.
Where the heck did it go?
Right.
And it happened, well, I didn't know the name Saleh. Mm-hmm. And Jamie's mother was a Stitchin.
Oh, okay.
And Stitchins lived next door to my parents in Athabasca, and we're best friends.
No way.
So I knew Patty when she was a young girl growing up in Athabasca, even though I didn't live there.
Right.
I got my gas at her dad's gas station. Her sister worked in a liquor store, and I knew them all.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, a professional relationship became very much a family, personal relationship. Mm-hmm. So, of course, Jamie was even much more special for me and to me at that time because she was family.
Pressure's on.
Pressure was on.
I want to talk about what the Oilers viewed the physical testing or training that you instilled when that started back in 78, 79.
Yeah.
Because not a lot of those hockey players were used to a physical regiment.
No, not at all. But, it was really interesting that when we first started off, we first of all needed to know how can we help them become more fit so that because most of them used the season to get fit,
right,
as opposed to taking advantage of being fit when they came to the start of the season. So actually Dave Dryden came to me, because Dave Dryden at the time was playing in the World Hockey with the Oilers, and the last year of the World Hockey for Edmonton before they went into NHL, Dave had retired. Mm-hmm. But the Oilers had asked him to stay on to help with a bit of player development and use, his skills as a veteran for some of these, because they knew they were going to have a bunch of young, crazy kids on the team. Yeah. So that was fine. So Dave and I knew each other, so he came to me because we'd worked on a couple of projects. Actually, the 77 National Wheelchair Games were held in Edmonton, and Dave was our chairman, and I was working with him on the games. So he came and he said, can we evaluate these guys? Can we measure them? Are there tests that we can tell and show them on paper and show slats on paper that, look at, this guy ain't in shape.
Yeah, quantitative.
And what can we do to get them from A to B? Mm-hmm. Or they have an injury and they're down here, how do we get them back up to where they were?
Right.
So I said, absolutely we can. So once, say there was bought into it.
Mm-hmm. How did you get them to buy in?
Well...
you translate it into winning. You say, look...
Slats is very smart.
Yeah.
He knew. He was the most brilliant sports psychologist without having any education. But he knew how to handle people, and he knew the important thing was winning. Mm-hmm. And if he could think he could get the competitive edge on every other team, then that would happen. So he agreed that we'll try it, but it's not going to interfere with this, and this. Right. But I'll make sure that the players have to do it. And so we tried to make it fun. Mm-hmm. We tried to make a couple of the tests that no matter what kind of conditioning, you'd be able to successfully complete it.
Right.
And yet also have a couple of competitive tests because we knew how competitive they were.
Yeah.
So the high intensity bike, where you crank the old resistance right up maximum and see if they can last for 30 seconds or not. 30 something or nothing.
Yeah.
I don't think we had one guy that lasted 30 seconds.
Okay, I got you.
So there was competition there, and so it really worked out quite well. And at about the same time, a colleague of mine, Howie Wenger, who eventually took it over from me. We did the Olympic team. Then when he moved out to Vancouver and Gretzky went to LA, he took Howie down there with him and took him out to New York with him as well. And because Howie was started doing it basically full time. But Howie had a contact in Philadelphia, so we went down there. Well, how are you going to get the Broad Street Bullies to buy into this? Are you kidding? We'll just beat the shit out of you. We don't need to.
Yeah, we don't need to be fit to punch you.
But I can't remember who the coach was at the time, but he said to Howie, Howie, if you can get Bobby Clark to get on there and do it, everyone will do it.
Right, of course. The
and
leader.
So Howie humbled him into it, and then it went from there to every team doing it.
Right.
So it was good, and it was quite enjoyable because the guys, I think, took it seriously after a year or two, knew how important it was for them, and started to see the results. And that's.
Who surprised you out of those guys? Was there anyone that you looked at and you just said, "Oh, this is going to be a rough go for you," and they jumped out ahead, or vice versa, where someone you thought was going to crush it and was actually in not quite as good a shape as you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There were a few pudgy guys there that and the guys at that time too. Of course, the Players Association wasn't very strong.
No.
So and we certainly wanted to make it clear that we didn't want Slats to be using that as a reason to cut the guy or to trade him.
Right.
And it really worked out that way. Certainly, Slats got the results, and we compared them to athletes in other countries and other sports, and so we saw where they were and where they could be. And I don't think there were any real surprises, one way or the other. There was always 4 or 5 guys who loved to train anyway, so they were fit and they were right up there.
Right.
There were other guys.
Which guys were those?
A lot of the small forwards that we had at the time.
Okay.
A couple of 3 of the Europeans that we had that were, what's his name from Czechoslovakia. He was pretty stocky and wasn't too fit at the time, but he lost weight and he got fit.
Yeah.
So it was. It really worked out very well. I felt the guys eventually didn't, not that they didn't look forward to it, but they knew they had to do it, and they had fun doing it, and they started getting more competitive with one another.
Right.
I want to see your VO2 max, and why
they gamified it essentially, right?
They very much gamified it. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah. What was? Did you test Grant Fuhr his first year?
Oh yeah.
How was Fuhr?
And it was really interesting because they would give him such a, come on, Butterball, let's get you up here on the bike, and he was, but he wasn't that bad. He wasn't the worst in the team.
Interesting.
And then some of the guys said, "Holy shit!"
Yeah.
But as I said, genetics has a bit to do with that. Your genes are going to help you to a certain degree.
Yeah.
And that's what likely helped him to a certain degree.
Yeah.
But he wasn't an all-star, that's for sure.
That's okay. He was on the ice where it counted, right?
That's exactly it. But he also took it seriously enough to start losing weight, getting a bit more in shape, and taking it seriously. I mean, Ranford, he was a fitness nut. He was always in very, very good shape.
Right.
So it was... Grant, I always give him a bad time every time I see him. I said, do we need to get back on the bike, Grant? Yeah. I don't do that anymore.
Well, we were talking to Pronger in St. Louis for Fuhr's documentary, and Pronger, which I didn't realize because, 06 was when I was 18 years old, so I saw Pronger in his prime, and this defenseman who's playing 30 minutes a night in the playoffs. Yeah. I thought he was always like that, but he told us, he goes, I wasn't a fitness guy at all when I came into the league. I relied on talent in junior, and then he got into the NHL. He wasn't very good his first couple of years. 3 years after he started with Hartford, he got traded to St. Louis, and he goes, I was always glad when Furzy was on my team because he was the one guy I knew that would probably not
as fit as me.
He was the one guy I could rely on to come behind me in the fitness test.
That would be it. Yeah.
So it's an interesting take. But of course, that was after Furzy started working with Kersey.
Yes.
And he turned his career around at that point in his life at 35 years old. Already been in the league for 15 years.
That's right.
And new revamped dedication to fitness and allowed him to play a few more years.
Sure it did.
So in all the Oilers stuff, the Steadward Centre, you also managed to do something pretty amazing with International Paralympic sports. How did that start?
Wow, that was likely the greatest part of the yellow brick road I was on. I was working internationally with the Canadian team back in since 1980 and or it's 1970. Sorry, 70. And after about 10 years, I saw the whole international sport for athletes with a disability starting to grow. And it was starting to include more than just athletes, spinal cord athletes using a wheelchair. Visually impaired were coming in.
Right.
The deaf were coming in. Cerebral palsy were coming in. So there were a number of different athletes with different disabilities started to collectively come in.
Right.
And
of course, these guys previously had all just been labeled in one category, disabled, but in reality there's a huge variation.
Well, there's a huge variation in the nature and the severity of the disability, Shane, but also the only organization existed was for spinal cord injured using a wheelchair.
Right.
So sport for visually impaired and cerebral palsy and these other athletes and amputees didn't start until mid to late 70s. And what are we going to do with them? They can't compete against one another because it doesn't make sense. So they formed their own international organization. So now all of a sudden we've got 6 international organizations that all are going in their own direction independently, and yet the IOC said, we're not going to help you at all unless there's one organization.
Right.
You know, you have to come together. Because what was happened, there would be a meeting of the 6 groups, and there'd be 3 from each group. There'd be the president, the secretary general, and the technical officer of each of the groups.
Right.
So those 18 people were making decisions on sport in the world where they didn't have a lot of expertise.
Too many unexperienced cooks in the kitchen.
Totally.
Yeah.
So what do? Stick my nose in. So what I did is I said, okay, well, I've got to find a way of bringing them together, creating one organization, and moving it forward. So I wrote a proposal. I designed a structure and governance for a new world body for athletes with a disability. I went to the IOC back in the 80-81 in that neighborhood and said we've got to have a relationship, and I met Sam Ranch and blah blah blah, and a couple or 3 years later nothing was moving, so I took that proposal and I sent it around the world. Who'd ever read it, listen to it.
So let me ask you, what year was that you sent that around the world?
84.
How did you go about sending that around the world?
I just got the contacts from every
addresses, put on 97
and it
stamps.
was a lot of snail mail licking stamps, and it was arduous.
It's incredible.
I was the president of the Canadian Federation of the time of Sport for Athletes with Disability, and a gal that worked for me at the time was relentless. You know, she was so good. I mean, we were both cut out of the same hunk of cheese, I think, because we worked so well together. And we started sending it out to everyone. We particularly focused on countries that were more open-minded, democratic, you know, the Norways, the Swedens, the Denmarks, Germany, France, places, US, things like that. So as a result of that proposal going around, we held a special meeting in the Netherlands in March the 23rd, 1987, where 41 countries came together, and we gave other countries opportunities to bring their proposals, and we had a 2 or 3 day debate. The end of that 3rd day, we came up with 23 resolutions.
So you took all the best parts of every nation's contribution.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I would say that 90% of it came from my paper. There were a few good points that were brought up that were embedded.
Right. But you spent your life dealing with it.
Dealing with it, and, and I suppose because my vision was such that there wasn't the same vision in some of the other countries. They were just prepared to go along with mediocrity.
Right.
So the first thing is that we had to be structured as a sport, not as a medical disability.
Right.
Secondly, we had to have representation by nations and by athletes. Thirdly, we had to work towards integration and inclusion with the IOC and other international federations, so that our canoeing people would link in with canoeing, etc., etc. So we had all of those aspects down, and we appointed 7 people from around the world to take those 23 resolutions, to take the proposal, which was basically mine, and to come up with a constitution and bylaws that we could consider. So that same time, about a month or two later, I'd met with Sam Ranch in Calgary and said, I got a proposal for you. And I laid it out, I verbally told him. And he said, put it on paper, come to Seoul next year, sell it to me, and I'll help you. Yeah. So I got her down and took it to him in Seoul.
So come back next year.
Came back the next year.
That's a lot of waiting.
I know.
But you must have had incredible patience at that point.
I did,
yeah.
And I've always believed too, that perseverance, failing 20 times and being successful in the 21st. So when I went to Sam Ranch, he was very receptive. He liked what he saw, and then so he said, "Go away and create the organization." And so September 22nd, 1989, in Düsseldorf, Germany. We started presenting the in fact, before that, at the Paralympic Games in Seoul, 3 weeks after I'd met with Sam Ranch, we were discussing hoping to set up the organization there.
Right.
But it just about imploded. The arguments, the fighting, and this and that and the other thing, and because people were focusing on their teams and the competition. So
maybe I'm not understanding, how was there Paralympic Games before there was an International Paralympic Committee, IPC?
Because they functioned as 6 different organizations that just came together.
Gotcha. They were still operating, but
there
was no
and the Paralympic Games, they weren't anywhere. They're light years ahead now compared to what they were.
Okay.
Because in the early days, there was only spinal cord injury involved. Okay. There was only one organization that helped that. The others weren't involved. Right. So the official International Paralympic Committee was founded in 1989 in Düsseldorf, Germany. Not unlike the Olympics. The modern Olympic Games were in 1896. Before that, there were Olympic Games,
right?
But they just weren't called them. They weren't organized.
It goes back to Roman times.
Ours is the same. I consider the Seoul game, because they were in the Olympic City. Was one organizing committee. All disabled were together. I consider that the start of the modern Paralympic Games.
As you, as the president of that organization.
That got elected that next year, because we weren't on paper an organization yet. So in Düsseldorf, people couldn't understand and get their heads wrapped around this constitution bylaws. So what had happened, I got up and I said, okay, because how can you get a democratic constitution bylaws when you're dealing with Russia and Iran and Iraq and Norway and Somalia and all
democracies.
That. You can't. So I said, well, rather than do that, let's just accept in principle the creation of the International Paralympic Committee, elect an executive, and have that executive do this.
Right.
So we had the election, and that's where I was elected as the founding president. And my executive was holy moly, there were some interesting bandits there.
Right.
There was Valentin Dickel from Russia, who was regarded as the strongest person in the world. He worked with the Moscow Circus. He would drive two cars up on a platform and lift up the platform.
He was one of your executives.
He was one of my executives.
Did he fit into a suit? Did he fit into a suit?
I would say it would have to have been about a size 65 suit. He was monstrous. But he didn't look like some of our football linemen.
Right.
This guy was built. And then I had a fellow from Iraq who was an amputee. He was a bomb expert and lost his arm taking a bomb apart. And he was a member of the Iraqi Olympic Committee. Very, very devout Muslim. And we would have executive meetings, and after the end of the night, you go out for a beer and pizza or something, no matter where you're at.
Yeah.
So I'd come home at midnight or 1 a.m. He would still be sitting on the floor outside my room because he wouldn't go to bed until he knew I was home safe.
Wow, what a guy.
He was very overprotective of me.
Incredible.
So I had people like that, stories like you wouldn't believe. Anyway, so we created IPC in '89, and so from then on it became the International Paralympic Games, Summer and Winter Games. Throughout this time, from '88, when I presented to Samranch in Seoul, until the year 2012, took me 12 more years to get a formal Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, signed by Samranch, IOC, and myself. 12 years.
So the IPC existed, but it wasn't until 2000 that the IOC acknowledged and officially accepted the IPC? Formally.
At the time, I was always involved in IOC meetings. I was on all of their commissions. Samranch was very good about including me in the Olympic Games. And and it's really it's funny for the reputation he seems to have, that no one likes him. He's divisive. He's underhand. He's crooked. Blah blah blah. We didn't always agree on things, but we respected each other enough that I think he'd go to the end of the earth for me.
Right.
He was very supportive, and any time I got myself into a bind, he was there that I could phone up. I could go over and see him. And he was always very, very good. So we were always formally recognized. From '88 on, it was one organizing committee for both games.
Right.
When you bid to host the Olympic Games, you had to bid to host the Paralympics as well.
Yeah.
So it was basically one celebration.
Right.
And so that's all it was, even though we didn't have a formal MOU.
Gotcha.
But that MOU was the seal.
Right.
Now, all of a sudden, we're legitimate.
So that brings us to the significance of 2000 in Sydney, because that was the first games where it was solidified officially.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
So talk about what that meant to you personally. And some of the challenges that I understand you faced in the Sydney Games.
Well, I still faced a lot of lack of respect and acceptance by many of the IOC members until even though I had been involved in the Olympic family from '84 on, I really didn't have any credibility until I was formally had the MOU and formally elected as a member. And then all of a sudden it changed.
Yeah.
It's amazing how something like that happened. But I didn't just have challenges with IOC members throughout this process. I had challenges within my own organization because I was fighting like hell for integration. I was fighting like hell to get our athletes recognized in the international bodies in the IOC. And some people just did not want integration because they felt that it would take away from our athletes, and they didn't always agree that the Olympic movement was the best place for us to be.
Right.
And so I was having internal and external challenges. When it came to marketing and sponsorships and things like this, it was a real challenge. And
how did you not let your personal passion for that topic cloud your business judgment when it came to that? Like, because when someone didn't want to include you, it must have just made you absolutely furious, because this is your life's passion, this is your life's work for so long.
But I guess I never lost sight of the dream.
Right.
I never lost sight of business principles. And so I just had to say, the timing's not right. I don't agree, but I'll accept it. And the time will come when I will win the war.
You're playing the long game.
I was playing the long game.
Good.
I will outlast them.
Yeah.
I'll outwork them.
Yeah.
And I believed in myself, and I believed in passionately our athletes, that they deserve the same recognition. I mean, some of the athletes with disability around the world are some of the most incredible people and athletes you'll ever meet. But it was very difficult. But I so remember sitting in the room with Samaranch with that pen shaking, because finally the dream is partially becoming a reality, because formality is taking place. I mean, the media room was jammed to the rafters, and Samaranch was so very complimentary, unbelievably so. And during this whole time, I was visiting nations, trying to get them, because we started with 41 members in '89, and when I left as president 12 years later, we had 175. So I had to travel those countries and convince them to buy into what we were trying to do, work with the National Olympic Committees in those countries to help them achieve. I was also working with the United Nations on an IOC commission on peace and truce, so going into nations where they either institutionalize anyone who was injured in war or famine or health, or killed them. Well, I don't know what they did, but they didn't seem to be around. So there was, the more I got involved in trying to make a difference and leave a legacy in this world, it was the deeper my passion became. And so I just wasn't prepared to give in and give up. If they said no, I must have asked wrong. So I'm going to change my tactics, And I remember sitting in a boardroom with a couple of IOC members and a couple of staff members from the IOC, because there was a huge debate about our sponsorship and our marketing. And the British Olympic Committee had complained that they were having a difficult time raising money, and they thought it was because more money was going to the Paralympics and they were taking money away from us. Give it a break. So I had a down, it was crazy. So when I had that meeting, one of the IOC members sitting there looked me right in the face, as close as you and me, and had his finger right up into my face. And he said, if you don't change your logo and your marketing program, we will crush you like a fucking bug.
And what did you say back to him?
I just said, well, I'm sorry you feel that way, but we're going to work with you and to make it successful for both, and give us an opportunity, and we will make it work.
Wow, incredible restraint shown on your part. Because you told me you were a feisty guy back in the day.
Oh yeah, I was very.
Must have taken all you had not to just reach over and just crank him.
I know, but I couldn't. But I was still,
because you had the cause in mind. Right?
I had the cause in mind, but I was still pretty feisty. I mean, you ask a lot of the people, some of the older IOC members, they'll certainly let you know that I was like a little bull terrier. I wouldn't let go of that leg. And I would push them. I would challenge them. And And when you look at it today, the Paralympic movement is the second largest movement in the world now. It's gone leaps and bounds since we were created in '89.
Yeah, it's absolutely remarkable.
Yeah.
So what are your feelings on, doping in sports and the scandals that continuously come up year after year? It seems to be more prevalent sometimes. But I know in Sydney you faced some challenges and you had to basically throw the baby out with the bathwater in a couple cases.
Yeah, we had some tough times, but I look back on it. During the earlier days, even before the IPC was created, a lot of people with disability were on medication supposedly for their disability. And we were finding that as our athletes became more and more fit, more and more talented, there was less of a dependence on some of this medication that was on the ban list. And so we really struggled. How do we do that? The doctors prescribe this for spasticity or for blood problems or anything like that. Well, we bit the bullet. We just said, sorry, there's other drugs and there's ways of getting yourself off of those drugs. So we saved a hell of a lot of athletes becoming potentially addicts or very dependent on medication, prescriptive drugs that they were having. And we instituted a very, very rigid program for testing. And we implemented it, and it was more stringent than the Olympic program. And we never had a lot of people that got caught, but there were some, more so in those that tend to, the powerlifting, weightlifting, that tended to bring it in more there. But I was absolutely against giving anyone the benefit of the doubt. If it's positive, you suffer those consequences. If you've let a team down, that's too bad.
You know the rules.
Yeah, I dumped out likely the best men's wheelchair basketball player in the world from U.S., and the entire team lost their gold medals as a result of that. But and he hated me with a passion. He went to the arbitration of sport and lost there.
Right.
So the Americans finally realized, well, he shouldn't have been drugged up.
Yeah.
There was no reason for it.
Right.
But he did. But then a non-drug related one was we were really getting pressure from athletes with mental disability to become part of our movement. Special Olympics always had their own organization, and they weren't there for winning gold, silver, bronze, and being highly trained athletes with mental disability. It was more recreation. Everyone wins. Everyone gets
the inclusion.
It's the inclusion, and I understand that, and I support it. But there was still a group of people around the world who had athletes that they felt that they trained hard enough, knew the difference between right and wrong, they would do it, and winning and losing. So that was fine. So the mistake that I made is in 2000, leading up to it, because they hadn't been involved very much before. In '88, because of the strength in Special Olympics, we were only able to offer a couple of demonstration events for mentally disabled athletes. But then after that, we said, well, we'll bring them in as full medal sports. But the mistake I made, I didn't get a strong group of professionals to develop and design a classification program. I mean, as you know, studying psychology so much, what's the definition of mentally handicapped? An IQ of 60, 80, 100.
Right.
Every single country has their own definition that's different.
There's handicap, there's deficiencies. Some people are way better at some things because they have a deficiency in others. And there's a spectrum on every single measurable
absolutely
trait.
So I left it up to each country to do it.
You need to get that?
No.
All right.
I left it up to each country to do it. So that's fine. I came to the games in Sydney, and we expelled the entire mentally handicapped group after the games.
Yikes.
Because some athletes from Spain and from Russia weren't mentally handicapped at all. they were high-level basketball players, but they weren't mentally So I went back and looked at all the classification forms. They were signed by physicians and psychologists and parents and teachers and friends. So there was no rigorous... And if we would have had that implemented, we may have been able to prevent it. But we learned.
So they faked it just to get in, to be able to get recognition. And was that... There was a Johnny Knoxville movie done, I think, in the late 2000s. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but it's called The Ringer. And the idea was that he to get into the Special Olympics, pretended to be mentally handicapped. And I don't remember it very well, but it was actually done in a really strong way that represented mentally handicapped people quite well, even though the premise seems appalling, a movie about that. But the majority of the cast was mentally handicapped, the people he was with the whole time. It was actually very positive for that movie.
Interesting.
So I wonder if there was any inspiration there from the Sydney events into this movie.
Well, there could have well been. So because it's only been in the last Paralympic Games that they've come back, and it's very, very strict now. There's a very strict classification, and there's only certain sports that they're in now.
Right. I wanted to ask you about doping again, in the sense that, are there athletes still doping?
Absolutely.
And why is it that we're not able to catch them? Did you see Icarus?
See which?
The movie, the documentary Icarus?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that given the resources that we have, they're doing a good job, but I think we could be doing a better job with testing. But you can't spend 24 hours a day going around the world spending millions of money testing every single athlete at every single event, and athletes are smart. I think what's happened here is that money has got in the way, because an athlete winning a gold medal will become rich. The silver medal is a loser. They won't get rich. So there's such emphasis on the gold medal and winning and the money that's there. Even in the Paralympics now, many athletes from the various countries get paid for winning gold or silver or bronze at the Paralympics now. Huge money.
And the countries have a vested interest in it too, because it gives the political leadership more clout, more sway amongst their people, that national pride that's drummed up. I mean, what better way for a government to get favor with the people to put together a successful Olympic program?
And you're so true, Shane, and what's happened here is that all of a sudden now, in Canada, sport isn't that important. We don't even have a ministry of sport. Every other country around the world has a ministry of sport, and it's one of the most prestigious and one of the most important ministers to have.
We don't have
in many countries. We have a Secretary of State hidden underneath, culture or whatever have you.
Is that just because the leadership groups of each individual sport are so strong, or is it just because we don't have that, we don't feel a need for that unifying system? Because I feel like, for me, an average Canadian, in terms of Western Canada at least, it seems to me that sports are really important.
I think it's very, very important to athletes and to our citizenship, but it's never been important for egos as politicians. It's, health and education and all these other things are essential, but sport isn't. It's just a byproduct of what we do in everyday life and school and the community and all this and that. I think if sport was a ministry and had a higher profile leader in running that, I think we wouldn't have the problems with obesity that we have. I think we would do better in sport, because right now, if sport isn't all that important to government, then we're not going to do as well as we could. Yes, there's money that goes to the Own the Podium program, and actually that relentless woman who worked with me back there runs the Own the Podium program, Ann Merklinger. And they don't get a lot of money, comparatively speaking. You're not going to get wealthy as an athlete trying to get to the Olympics. you can barely survive. So there's
I've
not a
seen
lot
that.
of
I've had a couple Olympic athletes on the show, and they tell me that.
Yeah. So there's not a lot of money that really gets into the pockets of the Paralympic and Olympic athletes in preparation for the games. You know, they're having to work at another job, etc. That doesn't happen in many countries around the world, because they know, and why does Norway and Switzerland and places like that do better than us per capita? Because they invest in in their sport. They invest in their athletes.
They've got an intentional structure.
Absolutely, and they've got a sport ministry that makes sure that there's a reasonable, the right amount of money and the right amount of leadership and the right amount, the best coaches to help those athletes. So it's just and then the status. Boy, the country leaders can now brag, you know, about how well they've done, you know, and it's very different mentality, and you know, U.S. is the same, but the U.S. gets $0 from the government, so all of theirs is private.
Right.
So that can also bring in some other problems as well. The rich
Competing
get richer.
interests.
There's huge competition.
Yeah, backdoor deals, things like that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of divisiveness and collusion that takes place in sport down there that we don't see here. That's for sure.
So I want to ask a couple more things before we wrap up. But in many of your biographies that I've read, there's a word that continually pops up that isn't particularly related to sports directly, but it's such a recurring theme that I have to ask you about it and your thoughts on it. That word is service. And it seems like everything you've done throughout your life, it's in service of this, service to these people, doing them a service. And what is it about service that's important to you? What do you feel that it brings back to you and the community?
Well, what it brings back to me is just the personal gratification that you've been able to make a difference in someone else's life. You've been able to help them achieve their goal, achieve their dream. Throughout my life, I mean, I'm not a wealthy person. Perhaps I could have been if I would have gone away from being service to saying, well, if you want my skills and expertise, it's going to cost you. You know, everything I've done throughout my life and all of this has been service and volunteer, because I genuinely have a passion to make this world a better place than what I found it, you know, and how many people or who I can help along the way, I will. But I'm also try to select or work with people who I feel can achieve their goals and their aspirations, and work with organizations and groups that have had a raw deal, that haven't quite had the opportunity to get the same breaks as you and I and other people. So I've been very blessed with, I guess, ingrained in me. Again, it's family upbringing and also the people you meet along the way who've made an impact on you, all the different mentors that you've had, the different doors and windows that have opened. I mean, I may not have made any money doing what I've done all my life, but my life has been enriched because of it.
Right.
I mean, to travel to the countries that I've had, to work with the people that I've had, to work with the athletes that I've had the opportunity to do. There's no question that my family sacrificed dearly because of it, because for the first 20 years of my daughters growing up, they grew up in spite of me, not because of me. I mean, I was traveling 300,000 miles a year. I was traveling 120 days off the continent a year, every weekend or second weekend. So, I mean, wasn't able to make the kind of impact on my daughters, but we've got a very, very, very strong family. But it's because you've had a loving wife and 2 daughters that saw that I was doing what I was happy doing.
Yeah.
And if they said, no, you got to stay home, I'd be the most miserable SOB ever.
Yeah.
But it was my passion. It was there before I was married, and it was there after I was married, and it's still there. Mm-hmm. And now, and maybe that's why I smother or I'm so involved with my grandchildren, because I've seen, and my grandkids now are coming 15 and 16, so the last 15, 16 years with them, I said, holy shit, I did miss a lot in my own kids' lives, because they were, both my daughters, very successfully, athletically and academically and professionally, and it wasn't because of me. Mm-hmm. But I had that, it was just a real deep down feeling that I wanted to make a difference and help.
Yeah. What I can certainly tell you from experience that just because you weren't there directly influencing them, I know for a fact that the work you've done around the world influencing how many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of athletes went just as far impacting them and turning them into who they are. Yeah. So I would still say it's because of you. You just happen to do it in a different way.
Yeah, and certainly that, could be true, Shane, but I've always believed that it's the famous saying, I live it every day, it's amazing what you can accomplish when no one cares who gets the credit. Mm-hmm. You've got a passion, you want to serve, mm-hmm. you want to help, you want to make a difference, and you want to leave a legacy. And it's always, and I don't know why or how it got instilled there. There wasn't anything specifically I did. Mm-hmm. Even the skills that I may have and the experience that I have weren't necessarily part of my plan that I set out to do. Mm-hmm. But when you did 1 or 2, 3 things, that opened a door and a window which led to something else.
It kept the momentum.
It kept the momentum going. It really did. Yeah.
Well, legacy is so important, obviously, to you, and as I think we age, it becomes more important to everyone. Mm-hmm. And so my favorite quote on legacy is from the New Zealand All Blacks and their ancient Maori ancestors of New Zealand. But it goes, your legacy isn't what's written on your tombstone. Your legacy is what's interwoven into the fibers of the people and the beings of the people that you leave behind.
That's right. It is.
And I think that you've done a phenomenal job of that, because you've touched and impacted so many people who wouldn't have had a champion for themselves otherwise.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for the time. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
We'll catch you later.
That's good.
That's good.
Okay.
That's it.
City of Champions, get out there, get involved, make a difference. That's all for today.